decision and let the operating system actually manage objects for you. What does this mean? This means instead of writing a SQL query to select data from a database, you instead would call an Objective-C method that itself figures out how to get all of the coarse objects from the underlying database, whether it's SQLite or something else. So in short, you don't need to use this for Project 2. For Project 3, you're welcome to use core data, and checking a box in the templates in Xcode allows you to enable core data relatively easily, but we would defer to any number of online references for actually wrapping your mind around the capabilities. And realize it's, again, just an abstraction layer that allows you long-term to simplify the management of more complex data sets. So let's take a quick look at SQLite, if only because SQL is probably among the most familiar mechanisms here, XML aside, and take a look at this example here. So in this SQLite project, PDF and source code's online if you want to play along, we have pretty much the same application that we played with last week that allows you to create a little interface like this in the simulator, where I had a whole bunch of words, in this case excerpted from the project itself, and I just wanted to have a little bit of a table view. And today the projector is a bit cleaner. You can actually see the rows in this UI table view. Well, let's see where this data is coming from and how you can use SQLite, not just to do something simple like this, but something a little more interesting. So here are my files. This is just a single view application template, so I kept it pretty simple. And most of these files, like main.m, I can pretty much ignore, though notice I do have small.sqlite. So I actually created this SQLite database offline using actually a little PHP script. Long story short, I wrote a little PHP script to open the XML file. Then I created a SQLite database using some PHP functionality. Now, this is not necessarily the norm. You can create an empty SQLite within Xcode itself, no PHP, no XML. But I just wanted to convert essentially our small.plist file to a SQLite variant so I could include it in the project. So I just dragged it over into my supporting files. So let's take a quick look at the app delegates, because that's where the story often begins after main.m. Nothing interesting here. This is just template code, view controller and window. Let's look at appdelegate.m. All right, this too looks pretty vanilla up top. But if we start to zoom out here, we see application did finish launching with options. Nothing going on there. So now let's look at viewcontroller.h. Really nothing going on there. ViewController.nib, well, this appears to be a list of cities, but really, again, this is just Xcode's depiction of what is a generic table view. So lastly, ViewController.m. So let's see what's inside of here. So notice a couple of things. I seem to have included this header file so that I can actually invoke various SQLite methods, some of which might look familiar if you've used this in some other language. Let's come back to this in just a little bit. And down here, synthesize words. What is that? Well, words is apparently referring to this property. I'm not sure why it's in my M file instead of .h, so we'll come back to that in a moment. But here's the synthesize for it. And here's the guts of this program. Init with nib name bundle. So when is this method called? And by whom? By the app delegate. So recall that the app-get delegate has that application did finish launching with options. And among the things it does is this line here. This is just boilerplate from the template. So you get this for free. And recall that the thing it's calling is view controller alloc and then calling on that object init with nib name view controller. So the app delegate creates a view controller object and then effectively loads into it the contents of the nib file so that the view controller has a view that it can present to the user. So this method, we're overriding why? So now I'm back in viewcontroller.m. Why am I implementing this method, which feels like it's some system-level initialization method? All right, step back. What does it mean to override a method? Little sanity check. Carl, yeah.
There's like already implementation that they give you, but then you want to add some functionality to it.
Perfect.
Override it, so you just get some more custom code.
OK, perfect. So in the context of object-oriented programming, where you typically have a hierarchy of objects, and we do in this case, the class is called viewController, but what's the parent class? Well, let's check the .h file. It descends from UI viewController. So Apple wrote that thing, UI viewController. Inside of that class, they implemented a whole bunch of methods, among which is init with nib name bundle. So if I want to override that method's default behavior in order to do my own app-specific initializations of the state of my world, I still need to call that method so that it does its usual thing. But as soon as it's done in calling, then I can go ahead and do what I consider to be initializing my application. So right here, I've copied the signature of that method. And notice that in the very first line of code, what am I doing? Well, I'm actually calling the parent class's version of this method and passing in literally the same arguments, nibname or nil, nibbundle or nil, that I myself was passed as arguments. So in other words, I ask my parent, do whatever you need to do with these arguments. And then I proceed inside of this if block to do what I actually want to do. Now, unfortunately, SQLite isn't the prettiest type of code to write. What language do you see in here, or languages?
SQL?
Yes. Well, OK, so SQL, good. What else? Objective-C, good. And C, right? So this is where things get a little messy in that the SQLite library that ships with iOS is actually still C-based, which means back are pointers and ampersands and all of this, more so than we see in Objective-C. So let us see what's going on here. So that was not intentional. I had to say that word. All right. So first, we have some mutable array. So what are we going to do here? Ultimately, my goal is to create an NS mutable array that's empty by default. Then I want to load from my SQL database that I dragged and dropped into this project when I created it at home. And I want to do a select on that database, get each of those strings, and put it into this array. So that's the big picture. So here's how I create an NS mutable array, allocating it and then initializing it. Here I have a pointer to what appears to be some kind of SQLite 3 structure. So that's probably a struct declared in what file? Probably the .h file that I imported up above. So now here, what's probably the point of this line? NS string path, NS bundle, main bundle, path of resource, ... So the whole chunk of code is going to, as the comment says, connect to SQLite database. But what is this second line of those three actually doing for me?
The file.
Yeah, sorry?
It's saying the file.
It's setting the file, yeah. So specifically, it's figuring out the path of the file. So if you're a PC user, this is asking the question, is it C:\program files / whatever? It's answering that question. Or in this case, it's probably going to be something like /documents / something. And specifically, the file I want is small.plist. So this just gives me a path, a string. Question? Confusion?
No, you said small.plist. I think it's small.SQLite.
Oh, yes, thank you. Small.SQLite, exactly. So that's the correct extension. So what does this do? You can infer from the function name, SQLite 3 opens some kind of connection to that database. It's not a network connection. It's simply it's like fopen in C, if you recall how to open a local file on disk. So how do I now talk to that connection? Well, I need to have a query. So I'm going to go ahead and create an NS string here that's literally SQL code, SQL query, very simple one at that. Now I'm going to have a SQLite 3 statement structure, or rather a pointer there too. And then I'm going to go ahead and call SQLite 3 prepare version 2, so very well named here, passing in a pointer to the database connection, so which is a pointer to some structure, then passing in this cryptic thing. Well, what is this doing? So this is taking this SQL NS string object, declared 2 lines earlier, and returning it as a UTF-8 string. So UTF-8 is sort of a fancier version of ASCII that can actually support far more characters than we would typically have on an American keyboard. So you can have Asian characters and other characters with accents and so forth in there. So this function just expects a UTF-8 string. So that ensures that what might be ASCII that I typed is actually UTF-8. Ampersand statement is actually passing in. It's actually not passing a pointer, per se. What's it actually passing in? We didn't spend much time in 50 talking about these. So statement is a pointer. So what's ampersand statement? So not value. That would be star. With the address of, so point, it's a double pointer. A pointer to a pointer. The address of a pointer. Now, why in the world would you ever want to pass in not just a pointer, but the address of a pointer? Recall that a pointer is just 64 bits in this case, and it's a memory location. Why would I care where in memory that 64 bits is? Yeah?
Because what you want to do is you're not necessarily interested in saying, OK, pointer point to this object. You want to make that pointer point to a specific place in memory. Exactly.
Exactly. So in this case, we want to actually change what the pointer itself is pointing at. And to do that, we have to go to its storage location in RAM, change those 64 bits so that the pointer is effectively pointing at some newly allocated structure, or in this case, some kind of statement. So this is a way in C, again, of you could also return the address of a statement object or a statement struct, but if you want to effectively return multiple values in C, you can pass in things by pointer and actually mutate their values, not unlike what we've done in those examples like swapping two values, passing them by reference. All right, and so ultimately, what does this thing do? It prepares the notion of a statement. A statement is something that you can then execute by stepping over it as follows. So while SQLite